All right. Well, thank you for joining. We'll keep letting folks in as they continue to trickle into the call, but we're going to go ahead with the content now. So a couple of reminders as we all are on this call together. Please do keep an eye on your microphone. Make sure you are muted for the majority of the presentation today. We will have an open discussion and Q&A portion at the end after both of our presentations. So at that point, you'll be welcome to come off mute, turn your video on, and engage with us all here together. You can, throughout the call, feel free to use the chat box and send in questions, comments, feedback throughout the presentation. So definitely hop in there, type away as you wish. There is closed captioning available. Looks like someone has just turned it on. So we will be recording that transcript and it is available for you to view if you would like. And as I mentioned, we're recording the PowerPoint and video today from our webinar. So this will be posted afterwards and also sent out an email to everybody who is registered. All righty. So to get us started, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about the CSA Innovation Network, of which I, Sadie, am the network coordinator. And thus we are the ones who host the CSA Ideas Lab on a regular basis. And then I'll give a brief intro to both of our speakers. We've got Sarah from FairShare CSA Coalition, which is based in Madison, Wisconsin, a Midwest and regional focused CSA nonprofit organization. And then Liz Henderson is joining us from NOFA, specifically NOFA in New York, which is the Northeastern Organic Farming Association, and URGENCI, which is an international CSA organization. Like I mentioned earlier, we will have an open discussion and Q&A period at the end, so stay on, hang out with us at that time. And then just a couple things for wrapping up as well. Alrighty, so the CSA Innovation Network, our purpose is to provide resources through programming and tools to support CSA development and just keep CSA going, both for individuals and at an organizational level. We host ideas labs as one aspect of our idea sharing facilitation and just building community throughout the CSA world. Also just trying to reach consumers and building awareness of the value of CSA. So that's really why we are all here putting these events like this one on. We do have organizations that are in the CSA Innovation Network from across the United States. We are continuing to collaborate with others, not necessarily represented here on the map, but you can see that we've got a pretty wide ranging group of folks who are involved. And excitingly, we do have more of a public facing or more wide reaching opportunity available right now. We're launching 2 learning communities. So I will send out the links here in the chat, and they'll also be sent out afterwards as one of the resources for you all to check out. But if you're interested in learning in community with folks from the CSA Innovation Network and other organizations that we collaborate with, either on the topics of equity and access within the CSA space or on regional organizing in the community-supported agriculture world, you can definitely click those links, read a little bit more about the description at the top of the form, and then if you are interested and have availability and capacity to join those learning communities, fill out the form and we'll get in touch with the folks who are able to join us. Okay. With that, we're already a few minutes into our hours of time together, so I'm going to hand things over to Sarah. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Sadie, and thanks, everybody. It is great to be here with you today. I'm Sarah Janes Ugoretz, and I work with FairShare CSA Coalition as the Apprenticeship Program Manager for a registered apprenticeship that pairs experienced vegetable farmers with aspiring farm managers. And since 2018, I've also been working part-time on my PhD at UW-Madison here in Wisconsin. I am very much looking forward to completing that this coming May. And I have been focusing with that research on just learning more about the different conditions and factors that create positive labor experiences on diversified vegetable farms for both farm owners and farm employees. And personally, I just have a variety of experiences working on farms myself, with farmers, and at farmers markets. So I'm looking forward to talking today about a big piece of that research, which has been exploring what farm employees working on diversified vegetable farms have said that they value in a work experience. So before digging in, I just wanted to call attention to two pretty major observations that have been driving a lot of this work. The first being that diversified vegetable farm owners here in the Midwest have been struggling to attract and retain employees from season to season. And that is a fairly major issue and challenge because more and more hired labor plays a really crucial role in the long-term sustainability of their farm businesses. And at the same time, farm employees themselves are really struggling to build sustainable careers for themselves in this industry. And many are increasingly asking, whether that is even possible. So since 2018, over these last 4 years, I have learned a lot through many conversations and discussions and interviews and surveys with folks from around the country. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. And I know that Sadie and Carrie shared some demographic information with you to kind of go along with who has participated up to this point in these conversations. But today I'll mainly be pulling from information that was collected through this National Farm Employee Perspective Survey, which we have 137 responses to so far, which was also launched through FairShare. And then 6 national focus groups that FairShare and Not Our Farm hosted over this past summer, where we were able to talk with 38 employees from across the country. So one of the key questions that I've really been focusing on is, what if farm owners had a better understanding of what employees are really looking for in a work experience and what they value in that experience? Would that make a difference in terms of this really, entrenched challenge around attracting and keeping employees on their farms from season to season? So part of that survey that we just wrapped up, there were these 4 questions that are here on the slide that really tried to directly get at that, asking employees, what are you looking for in a farm job? What are the top challenges that you're facing as a farm employee? And then what are the most important things that farm owners can do to attract people like you and to retain people like you from season to season? And what farm employees shared in response was pretty consistent across the board. There were 4 factors that were very clearly on most people's minds. And those findings were further reinforced through those focus group conversations we had as well earlier this summer. So those are the 4 things that we will take a look at now. Beginning with this number 1 factor overall, which is fair and livable wages. So based on that survey, fair wages represent both the greatest challenge and the greatest potential draw as something that would bring somebody to a farm as an employee. So as you can see, nearly 50% of respondents said lower unlivable wages were their top challenge. And then nearly 70% said that paying fair hourly wages would be a major thing to draw them in. And a few other questions here really tried to get at how feasible is it for people to do this work? And so as you can see, just over half of the folks who responded said that they do have a second income to supplement what they're making on the farm. And 51% of people said that they're able to work on farms because of external support coming in. Either they have a partner that has an income that can add to their household income, they have health insurance benefits through a parent, or they have access to state public benefits. So it's, some employees are really just looking for a temporary work experience. They want to work on a farm for a season or 2. But for those who are really serious about turning this into more of a career, these lower wages are a major hardship and a major obstacle as well. And many folks did talk about, I can make this work for a time, but there's often this tipping point that's kind of looming in the future. And this quote really speaks to that. On the next slide, Sadie, thank you. Wages are huge. Even if we feel valued in other ways with check-ins and open communication, when it comes down to it, if we're working without adequate compensation, that sends a pretty strong message and is a fast way to make us feel like we're not valued. And we can only make it work for so long. And this quote also gets at something deeper that was highlighted during some of our conversations, which is that there's this sometimes an expectation of sacrifice that goes along with this work. That what employees are getting in return for their labor, it goes beyond the financial realm. And people definitely recognize that that is true. They're learning, they're able to work outside. Many people feel a strong connection to feeding people in their communities. But there's also a real need to bring this professional lens into the conversation and acknowledge that both farm owners and employees deserve fair pay for the work that they're doing. So these are some action point slides to follow each of these factors, and they just kind of call attention to some of the things that employees mentioned as being in support of, in this case, more fair and livable wages. So they're not meant to be comprehensive, just presenting a few points that farm owners can consider, including, in this case, transparent pay scales and having a really formal and set schedule for when raises will happen. And then just being clear around, are there other benefits that employees may have access to over time? As for example, after the third season coming back, maybe there is a wellness stipend that kicks in. Basically giving employees something to see, as they build their skills and they contribute that value to the farm, there is a progression happening in that financial realm. And then this final bullet point is italicized to offset it as it kind of moves away from some of this lower hanging fruit and might entail a little bit more intentionality or investment or long-term commitment. So in this case, a lot of employees talked about the hardship that they face around being able to afford housing, healthcare, and just a lot of instability that comes with, the seasonality of this industry in our area. So this is something that, farm owners can consider. Is there any action that they can take to address some of these more entrenched challenges that employees face, like a wellness stipend, for instance? So moving on, farm employees also care about the type of work environment that they are stepping into. One of the questions on that survey asked, how important are each of these factors to you in a farm job? And as you can see on the bottom there, 1 means not very important and 5 is very important. So, many of these factors that contribute to the work environment ranked very highly. You've got respectful treatment, very close to 5, followed by safety, workplace culture, having tasks assigned equally across gender, and then having diversity on the farm crew as well. And a professional work environment was a key piece there too. So another thing that is not reflected here, but that was talked about a lot in those focus groups over the summer was how well organized is a farm? How easy is it for employees to show up, to step into the work and, after working very hard, seeing those efforts pay off over time. And that is kind of reflected here in this quote from a focus group participant who shared, the systems on the farm are really solid. The owners have their stuff together, and that helps because it's a system that we can trust in. They've honed it over time to be realistic for our bodies and our equipment, time, and schedules. And I think we've seen that translate to better tenure on the farm. So, when people are set up to succeed through the systems that have been built on the farm, that can really help contribute and build a work environment that allows them to be proud of the hard work that they're doing and to see those efforts pay off. And that can ultimately contribute to a decision to stay. So some of the action points that come up here include having an employee handbook and having a handbook that is used, that's referred to it regularly, that is accessible and that is kept up to date. That's actually a really useful tool for folks to have. And then making sure that expectations are clear and employees know what is expected of them, what their responsibilities on the farm are. And that is something that can be facilitated through having formal position descriptions written up for people and having them accessible as well. And having a set schedule for employees and sticking to that, having set start and stop times, that was something that folks felt very strongly about, and is a way for owners to really show, the work may not ever be done, but you're done for the day and I'm respecting your time. And then again, that, the less low hanging fruit pieces. Many farm employees talked about really wanting to see farm owners make a long-term commitment to building a farm culture that is one of inclusion and respect. And that does not happen overnight through one policy. That definitely takes a lot of intentionality and work. So the third key factor that employees identified is having opportunities for growth. So if you look here, you can see, opportunities for advancement and education and mentorship. Those both ranked very highly, and in that question about what farm employees value. And why does this matter? This matters because those, for many small scale diversified vegetable farms, are not being passed down from or within families at this point. So for the folks who want to, move into more formal management positions or have their own farms someday, they are learning those skills and they're honing their craft from the experienced farmers that they're working for. And as you can see, about 60% of the employees who participated in this survey have plans to still be farming 5 years from now. And they are really looking for that dedicated training. And that was one of the questions that we asked, what type of education and training would help you advance your career in farming? And production training was at the top of the list at 75%. So, if these learning opportunities are a priority for employees, but they're not able to access them at the farm where they're currently working, those discussions suggested that people would likely go elsewhere to have those needs met. At the same time, employees also recognize that, that delegation and coaching and, building that trust, that can be difficult for owners and for managers, especially when, there is a lot of turnover, and we are seeing that in our region. Because teaching those skills, that takes a lot of time and energy and investment. And when people leave after one season, that can, of course, be really discouraging. You're watching that kind of walk out the door and maybe going to another farm, but it's leaving your farm. However, when that learning is supported, that can be a win-win situation for employees and for owners who are building that trust and capacity, not just within their crew, but for themselves as well, as employees learn more. And this, I think this quote kind of illustrates that. It was shared again during a focus group discussion. Our team is entrusted with tasks, and we have the tools to communicate our needs, do the work, and then wrap up. That makes the feeling of competence and trust very clear. Having that trust in your workers puts a lot on them, but it makes us feel very empowered. And personally, that makes me more likely to stay here. So some action points for growth and learning include, asking about goals and what people want to learn, and then making a point to follow up on those conversations throughout the season. It's great to ask, but that follow-up is super important to people. Actively delegating, we talked about, starting small and building and expanding on that as trust and as skills increase. And supporting off-farm learning with professional development stipends. There were many farm employees who said, that is something that their farm owner does provide stipends to attend trainings or conferences to facilitate more of that learning. And that seemed very valuable to people. And then again, a more broad approach would be, if appropriate and possible, is there an opportunity to create a formal management position on your farm for a long-term employee to grow into? Okay, and finally, farm employees want to work for farm owners who have strong communication skills and who have built a workplace where open communication, two-way feedback, those things are supported through practice and through policies, and ultimately by the type of culture that has been built on the farm. So you can see here, effective communication and clear expectations both ranked really highly in response to that question about what matters to farm employees. And at the same time, it does seem like this is a clear growth opportunity for many farm owners based on this question that we asked farm employees. What type of education and training would make the farm owner that you're working for a better employer? And communication was at the very top of the list at 71%. And that was followed by employee management training. So this is from one of the earlier interviews that I did, but I wanted to share it just because it does kind of illustrate how communication can impact, what seems like the farm culture broadly, but employees' experiences from day to day. So this person shared, communication breakdowns make it really hard because then I dread going in. Is it going to be a good day or a bad day? And if it's a bad day, then I'm going to feel like I'm on shaky ground the whole time. So some final action points to consider for this last piece. Employees talked a lot about having systems that facilitate ongoing communication, like morning crew meetings. That was a really, commonly mentioned and very much appreciated by employees because they get everybody on the same page. And it's a time when people can share like, hey, my arm is hurting today, or this is how I'm feeling. And many folks also talked about really valuing having a chance to check in, both formally and informally throughout the season, through check-ins and reviews, a great time to check in on goals like we talked about earlier. And then these two final points, again, might require some more intentionality and investment, but really working to make two-way communication and open feedback a part of the farm's culture through practice and through the policies that you have in place to kind of support that practice. And then again, potentially for farm owners participating in some formal training to further build their communication skills, because those were so clearly mentioned as being very important to farm employees and their experiences working on farms. So wrapping up, farm owners are really relying very heavily on hired employees in our region. But most of those employees are struggling to see a long-term career path for themselves in this industry. They want to, for those who want to continue doing this work, they're building their skills, they're building their knowledge, but many of them talked about, reaching this tipping point that will leave them with few options other than to exit. So one of the goals of this project is to connect farm owners with this information of what employees value and what they're struggling with. And from there, farm owners can take that info and consider for themselves, are there actions that they might want to or be able to take in response that may increase the likelihood of being able to keep some of those skilled employees on their farms over time. So I will close with just sharing this quote from a focus group participant that reiterates this. We need to consider the principles of worker sustainability and what goes into making a farm business work. Farmers should ask what they can provide so workers can not only make it through one season, but can maybe even make this into a career. And then briefly, I knew I wouldn't have time to talk about these specific resources, but they will go out in the slides afterwards if you're interested. These are just a few examples of programs and trainings that we've been working on at FairShare and in some cases with UW Extension to support this education and training and mentorship that we talked about today. All right, and with that, thank you so much for the opportunity to begin sharing this work, and I'm going to hand it over to Liz.
Hi, thank you, Sarah. In addition to being a longtime member of NOFA, the Northeast Organic Farming Association, I represent NOFA on the board of the Agricultural Justice Project. This project provides tools, resources, trainings, and one-on-one technical assistance designed to support fair and just farm employment practices and tools for negotiating for fair pricing and contracts with buyers, as well as a third-party food justice certification label that can differentiate farm products and the farm brand to attract customers who increasingly demonstrate concern for social justice and farm worker rights. In the face of historic systemic violence and slave labor, next slide, please. In United States agriculture, an increasing corporate consolidation of power and market share in the food system, a small group of farmers, farm worker advocates, and organizers came together in 1999 when the National Organic Program released regulations that said nothing about fair payments to farmers and fair, respectful conditions for farm and food system workers in the organic food chain. We were determined to demonstrate that fairness in organic and ecologically based agriculture is practical and strategic. The lives and aspirations of farm workers and farmers are linked. Agriculture cannot claim to be sustainable if it fails to provide full human rights and dignity for all the people who work hard to bring healthy, safe food to our tables. So AJP bases our concept of fairness on the IFOAM principle of fairness. IFOAM is the International Federation of Organic Agriculture movements. And really what we're doing is providing tools to answer some of the questions that Sarah raised in her presentation. Sarah's surveys of farmers highlight that having policies written out in an employee handbook or guidelines is a key element in providing clear expectations to employees. Next slide, please. Land-grant universities and human resources services provide model handbooks, but they put lawyers' anxieties about liability before anything else. The effect is to intimidate employees. Since 49 of the 50 states have at-will laws, the handbooks emphasize repeatedly, often four to six times in bold print, that employers can fire people at any time and that employees in turn are free to leave. Without violating at-will law, however, an employer can commit to only firing employees for just cause. A farm can be legal and fair at the same time. The farmer can acknowledge workers' rights to raise issues, to negotiate on work conditions, and to do this without fear or retaliation. I've also provided two handouts that farms can use. One lays out farmers' rights and the other farm workers' rights. Understanding what these rights are, or rather what they should be, serves as a solid basis for establishing fairness together with solidarity between farmers and their employees. Next slide. A key issue in relations between employers and employees is whether the employees have freedom of association. It's important to communicate if a farmer wants to improve general performance, behavior, and worker engagement in the workplace, that respecting the agency of workers to raise issues or even to organize a union if they so choose. So that's what freedom of association is about. Next slide. Based on my farming experience, I urge farmers to establish a process for resolving conflicts. Train everyone involved in the farm so that they understand the process, know how to use it, and reject as employees people who don't want to use or engage in conflict resolution. ADP has a farmer toolkit and has examples of processes that farmers have used. There are methods like regular sessions of real talk, courageous conversations, and these head off conflict by encouraging open communication. Farmers can also study nonviolent communication. Maine farmer Polly Sicca has created a guide to relational farming. So please see the resource list for more details on all of this. Next slide. This is a model resolution process, but there are many ways of creating a conflict resolution process. It's just important that you do this and train everybody so that they know it's there and use it. So next slide. An employer can enter into an agreement with workers and spell out a clear disciplinary process and grievance process to back it up in case of a legal claim. In the AJP Model Handbook, we suggest that the farm specify a trial or probation period at the start of employment. During this time, the farmer reserves the right to dismiss an employee without going through the regular disciplinary process. But then once that period is over, there is a process and it's laid out and everybody understands what it is. And there can also be severe infractions, use of drugs, violence, sexual abuse that trigger immediate termination. But the clear disciplinary process is an important aspect of clear expectations. Regular evaluations of people's work can prevent conflict by asking what additional skills the worker would like to acquire. The farmer shows respect and caring for the worker as a person, and also may add capacities that the farm needs and benefits from. A set allocation of funding for professional development can be part of the compensation packet. An employer should keep a file on each employee that includes the wage and compensation package, projected work dates for seasonal workers, notes on performance reviews, a record of trainings attended, and notes for disciplinary meetings. The file should be available for employees to review at any time or at set times by appointment. And all required trainings should be paid. They should be on the clock. Next slide. Farm justice certification requires that farmers pay more than minimum wage. And as Sarah's research shows, being able to make a living from a farm job is of basic importance to farm workers. It seems so obvious that workers are more likely to stay on a farm where they are paid decently. AJP has a living wage calculator, and MIT has a useful calculator that helps you find out what the living wage is in your area. Despite overall low farm gate pricing system in our capitalist marketplace, there are farms who, by placing a really high priority on compensating workers well, are growing delicious produce as well as managing to pay living wages. But farms have to put that as a priority. It's not something that happens really very easily. So next slide. Language like this in the employee handbook, as well as good job descriptions upon hiring and promoting, creates a clear framework for communications. So making it clear that the employees are part of the farm system and that you're working as a team and you depend on one another, and living that in your everyday practice. So next slide. Over the years, AJP has facilitated the convening of farm workers and farm worker advocates to discuss the meaning of fairness to workers. And at the top of their list is safety, especially freedom from toxic materials. So AJP has developed a guide to creating a health and safety plan for your farm and a standard operating procedure, an SOP with bulleted list of steps a farmer needs to create a plan to train employees and everyone involved regularly in the farm, with annual review, updating, and scheduling of these trainings. The more a farm can involve everyone in the farm in thinking about health and safety and contributing to it, the better your system will be and the safer your farm will be for everyone. So finally, I have shared with you a series of resources, videos we have made, excerpts from interviews with farmers who have engaged in food justice certification, a guide to adapting our model employee handbook to your farm, 2 videos made together with the Gandhi Institute for Nonviolence in Communications for diffusing farm work, for diffusing conflict on the farm, either between 2 farm workers or between an employee and the worker. And I hope you'll be able to make use of those resources and the handouts and the SOP on creating a health and safety program for your farm, as well as a guide to developing the content of what must be in the health and safety plan. Palishika has that excellent article on relational farming and the handouts on farm worker rights and labor rights. So I'm happy to answer any questions about all of this, and thank you for your good attention.
All right, thank you so much, Liz, and thank you, Sarah, before that for your presentations. Really thought we got a lot of great materials here to discuss. Liz, I did want to just throw up on the screen really quick that we do have these resources linked, and for the audience, we will be sending all of the ones mentioned by Liz and the few that Sarah had brought up as well out with the follow-up email that will also include just a copy of these slides and the recording of this webinar that we're holding today will be out shortly as well. So at this point, we can move into our open discussion. We've got almost 20 minutes or so of Q&A time and conversation. So you can feel free as one of our audience members to unmute and turn your video on. I'm going to stop the screen share and you can just, take a look at each other's faces if you want to get to know some people on the call today, and use the chat to also submit questions if you may not want to, speak up on video or in a loud environment or anything along those lines. All right. While we wait for people to think about questions, I'm going to pose one question, and I will just copy it into the chat here. This was submitted ahead of time. So the question is, what trends are we seeing for small or mid-scale farms that are, smaller in that marketing regionality, and how they're able to secure labor for operations? I think I'll start with Liz, if you want to give a quick answer to this, and then Sarah, if you have more to add, you can jump in.
Sure. I don't think anybody is tracking that there's any, data that we can point you to. But what I hear from farmers that I know is that it's difficult to get the help that people need. And the farmers who are getting as much labor as they need are ones that are really well networked, that participate in the community, know a lot of people, have previous employees or interns whom they've treated well, who recommend them.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think what we know also is coming from conversations with farmers in the network. And one of the things that kept coming up in partnership with just that challenge of finding employees from year to year is that a lot of farm owners were sharing, they're experts in production, but they may feel like they aren't as confident in their skills as employers. And so we've been trying to identify some really concrete things that farm owners can do as a way of attracting and keeping people on their farms, as well as some, larger investments in terms of like training that we've developed to support them to build their skills and confidence in supporting a group of humans doing hard work in this industry.
Yeah, and that's why AJP has been doing the work we've been doing in trying to make getting those skills easier, or at least the resources that enforce you in learning the skills. Because my experience is that when I offer a workshop on improving your relations on the farm at a conference where farmers have a choice between how to grow better strawberries or how to reduce conflict on the farm, they'll go to the workshop on strawberries.
Right. It's definitely good insight on where we are in evaluating the labor state right now. We do have a question from Rogue Farm Corps about if there are any particular farms that either Sarah or Liz you are connected with that you think are pretty exemplary on exhibiting some of those principles you've gone over today. Do either of you know of ways that folks on the call or our Innovation Network audience could access through trainings or webinars connections to those farms who are doing well?
Well, one farm that is doing very well is Soul Fire Farm in New York State. And they have a series of videos, Liberation on the Farm. And those are all about technical issues. And I've really appealed to them to do a couple labor relations on their farm. So hopefully they will do that. But a farm that has been very willing to do some workshops is Rock Steady Farm in Millerton, New York. So they've appeared on a number of webinars talking about how they work on their labor.
Yeah, and I'll just add, one of the questions that I included in that farm employee perspective survey was asking farm employees, is there a farm that you've worked with that you think does have exemplary practices? Thinking that I would hopefully at some point be able to follow up with those farms and learn more about what they're doing. So really starting with the employees who are endorsing them. And I can go through that and touch base with Sadie, and maybe something can come out of that.
In answer to the question in the chat about having volunteers on your farm, strictly speaking, it's not legal to have volunteers help with the work on a for-profit farm. Our farm was able to have all of the members of our CSA work on the farm and help with distribution by having the CSA be a separate unincorporated association, which purchased most of our volume of vegetables. So then when they were working on the farm, it was U-pick. So that made it legal. They weren't our employees and they weren't replacing employees. So that's something to keep in mind.
Thank you for that clarification, Liz. As a CSA member who has helped harvest potatoes a handful of times out on my CSA farm, I'm curious about the setup there. So that's a good thing to keep in mind for farm owners and managers. I did get a question sent over from Dan. I'll read it out to you all. It says, paying higher wages, providing training opportunities, etc. All of these are worthy goals. I'm sure everyone would be in favor of providing them. However, we do also have to make sure the vegetables or other ag products are affordable for the communities we serve. So how do people navigate this push and pull?
Well, I have two different kinds of suggestions. One is to navigate on your own farm. is to make it a priority to be efficient, to work out all these clear expectations, and to focus some of your management energies on doing it really well, because farms like Full Belly Farm in California has all along kind of advertised itself as a farm that works to create good working conditions, and they've helped workers on their farm buy houses, make a career being part of Full Belly Farm. So that's the thing that we can do on our farm end, because the prices that farmers are getting are not high enough to cover our cost of production to do true agroecological production with all of the things that we really need to do to save our planet. So the other part is to work together to change labor regulations and laws on the national level, to put fairness to farm workers back into the National Labor Relations Act, so they are no longer exempt from the regulations that cover other workers, into the Fair Labor Standards Act. If it's done nationally, then there won't be competition from state to state. And the other thing is the Disparity to Parity Project, which is working to create the system that brought farms out of the Depression by requiring that buyers pay prices at the farm gate that cover the full cost of production. So farms had to do some limit on how much they produced and engage in supply management and conservation practices. But in exchange, they got prices that put their farm business in a line with the rest of the economy. So it was parity with the rest of the economy. So we need to change the Farm Bill. So please look for that. The National Family Farm Coalition has the Disparity to Parity Project. Support it, and we can change those laws and change the current situation where we have corporate capture and corporations get far more than their share of the food dollar.
Yeah, I think when I have these conversations and I'm digging through all of this information that people are sharing, it helps to think about, there are incremental changes that you can work towards that can be more immediate. And yeah, there's definitely a need to work on the larger system that we're all being, all operating within. And so a couple of things I wanted to talk about briefly was that question of, efficiency and what you're able to capture in terms of profit. And one thing that came to mind and that came up through conversations was that organization question. How organized is your farm, and how able are you to invest in skills with your workers, because that can build their capacity and can kind of free farm owners up. And farm owners have talked about this in my conversations with them too, of, hey, I can take some things, move that off my plate, and then focus on, some of these like systems refinements that I've really wanted to get into that can lead to some greater efficiencies on the farm as well. And then I didn't want to lose Katie Underwood's question way up there at 1141 about, there is a lot of talk about fair pay for workers, and what about farm owners who aren't making a wage that is considered fair. And so there are plenty of farm owners that I've talked with who are, working towards a fair wage for their employees, but aren't, at what would officially be considered a fair wage. And so a lot of employees also shared some other things that bring value in a non-monetary way. And I can kind of dig through that, but being able to go out into the field and take non-seconds is something that matters. Having community building opportunities, things like that can really kind of contribute to the experience on the farm, because if employees are being paid like $20 an hour, but all of these other pieces that support a good work environment are missing, that's probably not going to be an environment that people continue to want to work in either. So it's not an all or nothing approach.
Sarah, in regard to the living wage question as well, I'm remembering your mention of transparency. So if a small farm is still, on the way up to be accomplishing a living wage for their employees and for themselves, just being transparent about that and sharing the rationale behind where the wages are can be helpful.
Yeah, somebody said that too, like just being able to, even if farmers open their books up and they can see, here's all the money that goes to labor costs. This is what's going to inputs, inflation is a real thing. Yeah, so that can kind of keep the conversation going forward. Thanks, Edie.
Mm-hmm.
For a CSA farm, and even a farm that sells to farmers markets that has regular contact with your customers, sharing some of that information with them can also be powerful. The first time our farm shared our farm budget with the members of our CSA, the core group voted to raise what they all paid by $1 a week, because they were shocked at how little we were making and that we didn't have health insurance. So that ignorance on the part of customers who just assume that people are doing okay on the farms can be affected by us being more open in sharing the economic information about our farms. And it's also possible to charge on a sliding scale. My farm always did that and asked people with higher incomes to pay more so that people with lower incomes could pay less. And other farms that have done that have done it with success. And at the International CSA conference, the URGENCI conference last year that was supposedly in Brazil, but instead it was online, a farmer from Netherlands talked about sharing with the members of her CSA her low wages and saying, how much do you people make an hour? How would it be if you paid me an hour the amount that you make? And her members doubled what they were willing to pay for their shares. So that kind of economic data, which we're always pretty nervous about in the United States of sharing, can really help. But I just wanted to point to a question that's in the chat that's a really kind of dynamite question. How do you get employers who use coercive retention strategies to change? There is so much pressure for them to be like that. I mean, that is really the Chamber of Commerce view of how you work as an employer. So the best thing that I've been able to come up with so far is by trying to insert in as many of the new farmer training programs that I can across the country, that once you become an employer, you can be a fair employer. And here's the way you can do that. And maybe the more farms that are trying to do that and embrace it and speak about it publicly, there will be some kind of public persuasion or pressure on farmers not to threaten to deport an undocumented worker. But that's tough stuff.
Thank you for addressing that, Liz. We did get a few questions that were submitted ahead of time, touching on H-2A and the migrant workforce in the farm labor fields. And I appreciate your call out to how so much of that trickles back to policy, but just educating the people who are entering the field now to try to improve things going forward. Sarah, did you have anything else to add, or Liz, do you have a last minute thought? We've got maybe 1 minute before I'm going to move into wrap ups.
Well, I suggest
defer to Liz.
Yeah, that H2A is basically, it's a more subtle version of the Bracero program. And if we want an agriculture worth sustaining in this country, we have to develop a domestic workforce so that the job of farm work is desirable, well compensated, thoroughly respected. And if you're doing it for 8 hours a day, it can be one of the best jobs on the planet. I love doing farm work. So we can make it that way for everybody, but we have to work together as a community to change the situation since we're starting out from slavery.
All right. Thank you both so much. This was very illuminating, and I hope the rest of you on the call got a lot of value out of today's conversation. So, like I said, we're just going to wrap up here quickly. We had an hour of lovely time together, and there were so many pieces of information that we were not able to get through comprehensively during the presentation. So along with sharing these slides, we will also be sharing all of the reference materials as well. And I did pop into the chat the session evaluation link. It will also be sent out with everything else as a follow-up request. If you were here live today, or if you happen to be sending this along to any of your friends or your colleagues, we will also include the session evaluation for anyone who is accessing this as a post-live recorded piece of content, as opposed to being here on the webinar with us today. So keep an eye out for all of those materials. You can always just email us back at the CSA Innovation Network if you do want to get into deeper conversation or have any additional follow-up questions that come out of what you learned today from Sarah and Liz. Yes, Catherine and Caroline, I see your questions about being able to include the chat. The chat should be included in the recording. So I will make sure that we have that saved off, either just so that you can access it with the video recording, or we might be able to pull out some of the Q&A and get that into a written format as well. So we'll make sure that the really valuable last 15 minutes or so of the conversation stemming from you all interacting with Sarah and Liz is not lost. Okay, and with that, thank you everybody for attending. We very much appreciate your time this lovely fall day, and thank you again so much to both Liz and Sarah for your time preparing for and sharing your wonderful knowledge with this group.